She came to South Korea with nothing but a suitcase, a dream, and hands willing to work. He was the most powerful surgeon in Seoul, a man so cold his own staff was afraid to look him in the eye. They were never supposed to meet. They were certainly never supposed to fall in love. But this story isn't really about love. It's about a secret buried so deep that when it finally surfaced, it didn't just shake two hearts. It shook an entire family, a hospital, and a truth that had been hidden for over 20 years. Stay with me, because nothing about this story is what it looks like. His name was Dr. Joon-Seo, 39 years old, chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Seoul Medical Center, the most prestigious private hospital in Seoul, and arguably in all of South Korea. 3 international awards. 2 published surgical techniques that now bore his name in medical literature, a waiting list of patients from 14 countries, and a reputation so cold that the hospital's newest nurses were quietly warned about him during their very first orientation week. Not in the official handbook, of course. In the whispers. Don't ask him twice. Don't be in his way when he's walking to theater. If he looks at you and doesn't speak, count yourself lucky. When he speaks, it's usually bad news. Joon-Seo knew about the whispers. He did not care. He had been raised in the household of Han Dae-young, a man who had built a pharmaceutical empire from a single rented laboratory in Incheon and had very fixed ideas about what excellence looked like. Excellence was early mornings. Excellence was silence at work. Excellence was results, not relationships. Joon-Seo had absorbed every lesson. By the time he was 15, he was tutoring university students in biology. By 24, he had his medical degree from Seoul National University. By 32, he had trained at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore and returned to South Korea to take over the cardiothoracic department at Seoul with the efficiency of a man rearranging furniture in a room he had always owned. He restructured the entire department in 60 days. He also, in those 60 days, made 4 senior doctors cry, caused 2 administrators to consider early retirement, and reduced a brilliant but slow-moving registrar to such a state of anxiety that the man transferred to dermatology. Women, predictably, found him fascinating. He was tall, quietly handsome in the way that comes from never wasting energy on anything unnecessary, including vanity. He dressed impeccably. He spoke 3 languages. He had a penthouse apartment in Gangnam with floor-to-ceiling windows and very little furniture, because he was rarely home and had never needed a space to feel lived in. He had been on exactly 4 dates in the past 7 years. None had lasted past the second hour. His only real friend, Dr. Park Min-jae, once said that Joon-Seo didn't dislike people. He just hadn't found anyone worth slowing down for. Park Min-jae was the only person in the building who could say things like that to Joon-Seo's face and remain employed. Everything in Joon-Seo's life was exactly as he had designed it. And then Adaeze arrived. Her full name was Adaeze Okafor, 25 years old, the second of 4 children born to a retired civil servant and a woman who made the best egusi soup in all of Enugu State and had very strong opinions about the importance of education. Ada, that was what her family called her, had worked harder than anyone she knew. She had won a partial scholarship to study biomedical science at a university in Seoul through a competitive African exchange program. It was the proudest day of her mother's life. Her father had killed a goat. Her neighbors had come to celebrate. And Ada had arrived in Seoul full of hope and completely unprepared for how expensive the city actually was. The scholarship covered tuition. It did not cover rent, food, transport, or the small, relentless costs of simply existing in one of the most expensive cities in Asia. She had found a part-time job within her 3rd week. Seoul Medical Center's housekeeping department was hiring. The hours were flexible. The pay was fair. The hospital was close to her university campus on the metro. She applied on a Tuesday and started on Thursday because she did not have the luxury of taking time to decide. 10 months later, she was one of the most reliable members of the housekeeping staff. Her Korean had improved dramatically. She had spent her first 3 months listening to Korean radio during shifts, borrowing grammar books from the hospital library, and practicing with the older security guard at the gate who found her accent charming and corrected her pronunciation with the patience of a grandfather. She loved Seoul the way that only someone who arrived alone and had to build everything from nothing can love a city. With a complicated, aching, grateful love. She had her routines. She had her small rented room in Mapo-Gu. She had her textbooks and her two best friends, Naomi, a Zimbabwean student who lived 2 floors above her, and Kemi, a Nigerian nurse already working at a clinic across town. She had everything she needed. What she did not have, what she was not looking for, not even slightly, was what happened on the morning of April 14th when she turned a corner in the east wing of Seoul Medical Center and walked directly into Dr. Han Joon-Seo. It was 5:22 in the morning. Ada was pushing her cleaning cart down the corridor, earphones in, listening to a recorded lecture from her cellular biology professor that she had already listened to twice and still needed to fully understand before Friday's practical. Her lips moved slightly as she repeated terms under her breath. She turned the corner fast. She always moved fast in the early morning because the East Wing needed to be done before the first surgical team arrived, and her cart hit something solid. The bucket tilted. Soapy water splashed outward in an arc. And directly in its path stood a man in a white coat holding a cup of coffee, looking at her with an expression so precisely controlled it was almost more frightening than anger. Ada pulled out her earphones. The man was very still, very tall. The coffee had caught the lower half of his coat. His face was, even in her current state of absolute panic she noticed, remarkably composed. Sharp jaw. Dark eyes that were currently doing the kind of looking that felt like a full medical examination. "I'm so sorry," she said immediately in Korean. "I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't see you." "Clearly," he said. His voice was low, even, like a flat line on a monitor. She grabbed a cloth from her cart and moved to help clean his coat. He stepped back slightly, not dramatically, just enough to make it clear that he would be handling that himself. "Your name," he said. She froze. "Adaeze Okafor, sir. Housekeeping." He said her name carefully, correctly. She noticed that. Most people mangled it immediately. "What are you listening to?" The question surprised her so much, she answered honestly. "A recorded lecture on cellular membrane transport, sir. At 5 in the morning. I have a practical on Friday." He looked at her for another long moment, the kind of look that felt like he was reading a patient chart and had found something unexpected. "You're not a medical student," he said. "Biomedical science. Exchange program." And then he turned and walked past her. "Go back to work." Ada stood in the corridor for 10 full seconds, heart hammering, before she remembered how to move. She was certain she would be reported to her supervisor. She was not reported. What happened instead 3 days later was stranger. The head of housekeeping called Ada into her office on Friday afternoon. Ada walked in prepared for consequences. Instead, Mrs. O, a small, precise woman who had run the housekeeping department for 16 years and had very little sentimentality about it, slid a printed document across the desk. "Dr. Han has recommended you for the hospital's International Staff Education Grant." Ada stared. "I'm sorry. It covers 50% of your tuition." He submitted the recommendation himself, directly to the board, 2 days ago. Ada's mouth opened. She closed it, then opened it again. Mrs. O continued reading from a note on her desk. Dr. Han had also requested that Ada's shift be adjusted. She currently started at 4 in the morning. He had moved her to 6. He wrote, and Mrs. O paused here as if still processing the content, that beginning a physical shift at 4 in the morning while maintaining a full university course load was medically inadvisable and operationally counterproductive. Ada sat in that office for a long time after Mrs. O finished speaking. She had never been told she mattered to an operation before. Not in those words. Not by someone like him. She went back to her shift. But something had changed in her chest, quietly, without permission. She went to thank him. She almost didn't. She told herself it was unnecessary, that he was a busy man, that people like him gave without expecting acknowledgement, and probably preferred it that way. But her mother's voice was louder than her hesitation. "When someone does you good, Adaeze, you look them in the eye and you say thank you. That is basic humanity." So she knocked on his office door on a quiet Thursday afternoon. He told her to come in without looking up. She stepped inside carefully. He was reviewing a surgical report, red pen in hand. The office was very clean, very ordered. There were no personal photographs anywhere. A single small cactus sat on the windowsill, the only living thing in the room besides him. I came to thank you for the grant recommendation. Sit down, he said. She sat. What is your practical score from last Friday? She blinked at the directness. 91%, sir. Overall program average? 88. He set his pen down and looked at her for the first time. What do you want to do with the degree? She answered without hesitating. She never hesitated when it came to this. Medical research, specifically cardiac tissue regeneration. There's a lot of work being done with stem cell applications in South Korea, and I want to. She caught herself. You didn't ask for the full version. I did ask, he said. Continue. She continued. He did not interrupt once. When she finished, 8 minutes later, having covered cardiac tissue engineering, the research gap in African patient data, and her long-term hope to build a research partnership between institutions in South Korea and Nigeria, he was quiet. Then he said, there's a research seminar at Yonsei University next month. Professor Lim Sung-wook. Cardiac regeneration. I'll have my assistant send you the details. Ada stared at him. Why? Because you clearly have the intellectual capacity for it, and no one has thought to point you in the right direction. He picked up his pen. You can go. She stood and moved to the door. Adaeze. She turned. 88% while working a housekeeping shift. That is not a coincidence. That is discipline. Don't waste it. She left. In the elevator, she pressed her back against the wall and breathed. Something was happening. She didn't know exactly what. But whatever it was, it had taken root in her chest and was already growing. Joon-Seo did not understand himself. He was a man who prided himself on understanding everything about himself. He knew his habits, his triggers, his limits. He had built a life of perfect self-awareness because self-awareness was control, and control was the only thing standing between him and the chaos he had watched his father drag their family through for years beneath the polished surface of the Han Empire. And yet, here he routed his morning walk through the East Wing, purely for efficiency reasons, he told himself, because the East Wing had better ventilation, and he thought better in well-ventilated spaces. He left a copy of a cardiac research journal at the hospital library's front desk, flagged to a chapter on stem cell applications. For general staff enrichment, he told the librarian. He asked Dr. Park Min-jae, completely casually, whether the hospital cafeteria could extend its hours by 30 minutes on Thursday evenings. Why Thursday evenings specifically?
Park asked.
Statistical data shows higher staff retention when meal options align with shift changes. Park stared at him. Joon-Seo, you have never once eaten in the cafeteria. I'm thinking about it. Park stared longer. Don't, Joon-Seo said and walked away. But the truth that was quietly dismantling years of careful architecture, was simple. He thought about her. At strange moments. In the middle of reviewing a pre-op chart. At 2 a.m. when he couldn't sleep. He thought about the way she spoke, like someone who had decided that the truth was always the most efficient option. He thought about how she had described her research ambitions with the kind of fire he hadn't seen in someone her age in years. He thought about the fact that she was studying cellular biology lectures at 5 a.m. in a hospital corridor because she had decided that time was too valuable to waste. He recognized her. That was the strangest part. In all the ways that mattered, the relentlessness, the control, the refusal to let circumstances define the ceiling, he recognized her completely. And that scared him in a way that no surgical complication ever had. The hospital's annual donor gala was held every November at a hotel in Itaewon. Black tie. Seoul's elite, politicians, tech executives, cultural figures, old money families. Joon-Seo attended every year and left exactly on schedule. This year, the hospital's PR director had, without consulting him, included 2 scholarship recipients in the program as a human interest segment for donors. One of them was Adaeze Okafor. Joon-Seo found out the morning of the event. He said nothing. He adjusted his tie. He went to the gala. She walked in wearing a deep burgundy dress that her friend Kemi had helped her alter. Her hair was up, with small gold pins that caught the light. She looked entirely unlike anyone else in the room, not just because she was one of the very few black women there, but because she moved with the particular ease of someone who has learned to be comfortable exactly as they are, in any room. Joon-Seo was talking to a director of a biotech firm when she entered. He lost the thread of the conversation. He found it again, finished the conversation, and crossed the room. "You look different," he said when he reached her. "Is that a compliment, Dr. Han?" "It's an observation." She tilted her head slightly. "You look the same, like you'd rather be anywhere else." The biotech director, still watching from across the room, saw Dr. Han Joon-Seo, the man who did not smile at galas, almost smile. They stood together for most of the evening. The conversation moved the way conversations do between two people who are both secretly relieved to have found each other in a crowded room, fast and curious, jumping from topic to topic. She told him about Mapo-Gu, about the sound of rain on a zinc roof, and the specific way her mother's kitchen smelled on Sunday mornings. He told her, and he was not sure why he did this, about the 2 years he had spent in Baltimore during his fellowship, how he had walked the same 2-mile route every morning because the unfamiliarity of everything else made him anxious, and how he had never told anyone that. "You were homesick," she said simply. "I was disoriented." "That's the same thing, Junio." He looked at her. "You don't have to call me Dr. Han outside of the hospital," he said. The shift in her expression was small, but he caught it. Something warm moving across her face, quickly composed. "Junio," she repeated slowly, trying the name. "Okay." And then her face changed. Completely. He saw it happen in real time, the warmth draining, replaced by something careful and controlled and afraid. He followed her gaze across the room. A man had just walked into the gala. Korean, late 30s. Well-dressed, the expensive, effortful kind. He was scanning the room with the confidence of someone who expected to be the most important person in it. When he found Ada in the crowd, he smiled. It was not a kind smile. His name was Lim Chaiwon. Ada's voice, when she said it, was the flattest Joon-Seo had ever heard from her. "Someone you know," Joon-Seo said. "Someone I knew. In Lagos. His family has business interests across West Africa. We met at a conference for African-Asian research partnerships. We were close. For a while." Chaiwon reached them and folded himself into the conversation with practiced ease, shaking Joon-Seo's hand and acknowledging Ada with a smile that contained too much. Too much history, too much ownership, too much of something unresolved. "Small world," he said. "Not small enough," Ada replied pleasantly. Chaiwon laughed as though she'd said something charming. When he eventually drifted off to work the room, Joon-Seo waited a moment. Then he said, "What did he do?" Ada looked at him. "Why do you assume he did something?" "Because you just greeted a man you clearly once cared about with the warmth of a blood pressure reading." She exhaled, a short sound that was almost a laugh, but wasn't quite. "It's a long story," she said. "Tell me." She looked at him for a moment, searching. Whatever she was looking for, she seemed to find it. "Not here," she said. "Not in this room." They left the gala early, together, and walked along the river in Itaewon, the city glittering across the water, and she told him everything. Ada had met Lim Chaiwon in Lagos 18 months ago. He had been charming, genuinely so. He had spoken about his family's work in African markets with apparent sincerity, investment, infrastructure, development. He had been interested in her research. He had made her feel, for the first time since arriving on the continent as a student researcher, truly seen. They had dated for 5 months. And then she had found something. Documents on his laptop. She had not been snooping. She had been using it with his permission to print a paper when he was out. What she found showed that the Lim family's infrastructure investment in Nigeria was significantly less clean than it was marketed. Land acquisition in 3 states through falsified community consent documents. The Lim family had not built roads and clinics in those communities. They had legally extracted the land beneath them and displaced the communities to sell to developers. Ada had grown up 2 states from one of those communities. She had a childhood friend whose family had been part of the displacement. She had heard that story sitting in her mother's kitchen when she was 17. She confronted Chaiwon. He had not been angry. He had been calm, and that calmness was somehow worse than anger would have been. My family's business operates in complex environments, he said. What looks like displacement is often restructuring. You're not looking at the full picture. I am looking at signed documents, she said. He smiled, a very patient smile. Ada, you're a student. You study cells. Leave geopolitics to people who understand it. She left. Not just the apartment. The country. She had already applied to Seoul by then. She left 3 weeks earlier than planned, and she never told anyone why. Her research supervisor in Lagos thought she had simply gotten cold feet about the relationship. Her family thought she was just eager to start the Korean program. Nobody knew about the documents. Nobody. Until now, standing by the Han River, the city lights reflected in the water. Joon-Seo listened without interrupting. When she finished, the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of someone processing something carefully. Then he said, very quietly, the Lim family. Something in his tone made her turn to look at him. His expression had changed, barely, almost imperceptibly, but she was learning to read him. You know them, she said. A pause. Longer than usual. Yes, he said. I know them. And in the way he said it, in the careful, controlled, suddenly complicated way he said it, she understood that this story was not as simple as it had seemed. This is the part nobody saw coming. Joon-Seo did not tell her everything that night. He told her he knew the family by reputation. He steered the conversation back to her, made sure she got home safely, said goodnight at the entrance of her building, and walked back to his car. He sat in it for 45 minutes without starting the engine. Because what he knew about the Lim family, what he had known for 6 months, what he had been quietly and methodically investigating since a piece of information had arrived in his email from an anonymous sender, was this. Lim Chaewon's father, Lim Byung-chul, had a business partner, a silent partner, whose name appeared on none of the public documents, whose share of the land acquisition proceeds had been routed through a medical supply company registered in Singapore. That medical supply company had a majority shareholder, and that shareholder was Han Dae-young, Joon-Seo's father, the man who had built a pharmaceutical empire, the man who had raised Joon-Seo on discipline and excellence and the singular importance of the Han family name, the man who had, it appeared, been quietly profiting from displaced communities in West Africa for at least 7 years. Joon-Seo had not confronted his father yet. He had been building the evidence carefully, methodically, the way he did everything. He had told no one. He had barely allowed himself to feel the weight of it, the cold, nauseating weight of discovering that the man who defined honor for you has been living in dishonor. And now here was Ada, a woman he was falling for, and he could no longer pretend otherwise, who had unknowingly walked into the middle of the same truth he had been circling alone for 6 months. She didn't know his father was involved. He had to decide whether to tell her. He decided within 24 hours. He called her the next morning and asked to meet. They sat in a small cafe near the hospital, the kind of place where 2 people can talk quietly without being overheard, and he told her everything. He said it out the way he would a diagnosis, clearly, in order, without softening the difficult parts. His father's name, the Singapore company, the timeline, his 6 months of careful private investigation. Ada sat very still throughout. When he finished, she said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "How long have you been carrying this alone?" He was not prepared for that to be her first question. 6 months, he said. That's too long to carry something like that. You carried yours for 18 months. Yes, she said. And look what it cost me. I left a country. I lost 5 months of my life to someone who didn't deserve them. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. What are you going to do? I'm going to confront my father. With the full evidence. And then I'm going to give what I have to the right people. That will damage the Han name. Yes. Your father built everything around that name. I know. And you're still going to do it. There is no version of myself, he said slowly, that can know what I know and do nothing, regardless of whose name is on the building. Ada sat with that for a moment. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over his. It was the first time she had touched him deliberately, without the context of a corridor collision or a crowded room. I'll go with you, she said. When you talk to him. If you want. Why? Because 6 months is too long to carry it alone. And you don't have to anymore. For the first time in a very long time, Joon-Seo felt something in his chest that had nothing to do with surgery. Something that felt, surprisingly, like relief. He faced his father on a Saturday morning at the Han family home in Songbuk-dong. Ada waited in the car. Han Dae-young was 71 years old. Still sharp. Still controlled. The man had built an empire on his own terms, and he did not apologize for anything lightly. Joon-Seo laid the documents on the dining table. His father looked at them for a very long time. Where did you get these? It doesn't matter where. What matters is that they're real. You know they're real. A pause. I need to hear you say it. A long, terrible silence followed. Then Han Dae-young exhaled, slowly and deeply, and for the first time in Joon-Seo's life, his father looked old. I did not know, in the beginning, the full extent of what Byung-chul was doing, he said. By the time I understood, I was already implicated. Joon-Seo said. Yes. Joon-Seo sat down across from his father. People lost their homes. Communities were destroyed. Families. Han Dae-young said nothing. I have to give this to the relevant authorities, Joon-Seo said. When this comes out, and it will come out, it will be better for you if you cooperate than if you're found. His father looked at him. This will end everything I built. Not everything. I will still be a surgeon. The hospital will still stand. The Han name will survive if we face this with honesty. It will not survive if we run from it. Han Dae-young was quiet for a very long time. Then, he did something Joon-Seo had not seen him do since Joon-Seo's mother's funeral, 22 years ago. He covered his face with his hands. And Joon-Seo, despite everything, despite the 6 months of cold fury, despite the weight of what his father had done, sat beside him and waited. Because love is not the same as approval. And family is not the same as complicity. And sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone who has lost their way is refuse to leave them in the dark alone. I'll help you, Joon-Seo said quietly. We'll do this properly. When he came back to the car an hour later, Ada took one look at his face and said nothing. She simply started the engine. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, through the streets of Seoul, past the familiar corners and lights of a city that continued entirely without awareness of what had just changed. Then she said, Are you okay? He thought about it honestly. Not yet. But I will be. She nodded. She drove. That was enough. The months that followed were not easy. Han Dae-young's cooperation with investigators was quiet and carefully managed. It did not make headlines the way a scandal without cooperation might have. The financial restitution process was long and complex. There would be consequences. But there was also, slowly and painstakingly, accountability. Lim Byung-chul did not cooperate. His case was louder and uglier. Chaewon left Korea shortly after. Ada heard through Kemi, third hand, that he had moved to Canada. She felt nothing in particular about this. She was too busy. Her second year in the biomedical program had begun. She was attending Professor Lim Sung-wook's research seminars at Yonsei and had been invited to contribute to a collaborative paper on cardiac tissue applications in African patient populations. It was, she told Naomi one evening in their tiny kitchen, the happiest she had been in her academic life. Naomi looked at her for a long moment. Is it the research? Naomi said. Or is it the surgeon who recommended the seminar? Don't, Ada said. I'm just saying. Naomi. The man went to a bookshop and bought you a research reference guide and pretended he was passing by. Adaeze, the man lives in Gangnam. You are in Mapo-Gu. There is no version of passing by. Naomi was not finished. He also rescheduled a surgery consult so he could attend your research presentation at Yonsei last Thursday. I know because Kemi's colleague knows one of his registrars. A pause. You like him, Naomi said simply. I'm aware, Ada said, to the inside of her coffee cup. Does he know? Ada thought about the cafe, where he had told her about his father. The Han River at night. The drive home in silence. Every small, precise, thoroughly deniable thing he had done in the months since to make her life easier, and every equally precise, fully deliberate thing he had done that was clearly not about efficiency at all. "I think," she said slowly, "that we are both aware." He told her on an ordinary evening. Not at a gala. Not by the river. Not in a moment that could be framed or photographed or made into a story. He told her in the hospital cafeteria, the cafeteria he had extended the hours for, the one he had never himself eaten in until the evening. He sat down across from her with a tray of food, and she had looked at him as though he had arrived from another dimension. They had been sitting together there on Thursday evenings for 2 months. Neither of them had named what it was. Until this particular Thursday, when the cafeteria was nearly empty and she was telling him about a meeting with her research supervisor, and she laughed at something. She laughed with her whole face. He had noticed this from the very beginning, and he set down his chopsticks. "Ada." She looked at him. "I am not a man who says things he hasn't thought through." "I know," she said. "I've been thinking about this for a considerable amount of time. I don't know how to do this without being direct, so I'm going to be direct." He held her gaze. "I would like to know if what I think is between us is what is actually between us. Because I have no interest in pretending it isn't there. I've tried that. It doesn't work." The cafeteria hummed around them. Someone was washing up in the kitchen behind the counter. Ada looked at him for a long moment. "You rerouted the supply trolleys so my shift would be shorter," she said. "Operationally. You extended the cafeteria hours. Staff retention. You sat in a university waiting room for 90 minutes drinking vending machine coffee while I took my cellular biology exam." A pause. "It was a very important exam," he said. She pressed her hand flat on the table, breathed, and looked at him with an expression that was completely unguarded. "Yes," she said. "What you think is between us is what is actually between us." Joon-Seo, the man who had rerouted trolleys and extended cafe hours and driven across Seoul to buy a research guide and called it passing by, exhaled, like a man who had been holding his breath for a very long time. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. The cafeteria continued around them. Ordinary.
Fluorescent lit. Perfect.
Spring arrived in Seoul the way it always does, suddenly and completely, as if winter had simply decided it was done. Cherry blossoms appeared along the streets near Seoul Medical Center, pink and white and brief, the way beautiful things often are. Ada was walking through the East Wing corridor on a Thursday morning, a different Thursday, a later one, the kind that belongs to a chapter of life that feels earned, when she passed the corner where it had all begun. The corner where she had turned too fast and hit a man with a mop and changed both their lives. She smiled at the floor. "What?" said a voice behind her. She turned. Joon-Seo was coming down the corridor, white coat, chart under his arm, coffee in hand, from the cafe across town, the good one. His assistant still made the drive. "Some things didn't change." "Nothing," she said. "I was just thinking about this corner." He looked at the corner. Then at her. "You owe me a dry cleaning bill," he said. She laughed, and the sound of it, warm and full and unhidden, traveled down the corridor and settled in the walls of a building that had been, for a long time, a place where everyone was afraid to make too much noise. He fell into step beside her. Their footsteps matched without either of them trying. "How is the paper going?" he asked. "Professor Lim thinks we can submit by June. You'll be first author." "He hasn't. You'll be first author. I've read your sections." "You read my draft sections?" Park Min-jae forwarded them. "He's on the review committee. Did you ask him to?" A pause. The very briefest pause. "The committee requested them," he said. "I may have mentioned your work to Min-jae. Once. Possibly twice." She shook her head, smiling, and he watched her smile the way he had been watching it since a 5 o'clock morning in a hospital corridor when she pulled out her earphones and looked at him with dark, wide, entirely honest eyes. Before she could move past the corner, he stopped walking. She stopped too and turned to face him. He looked at her the way he had only recently allowed himself to look at anyone, not assessing, not measuring, not calculating what he could diagnose or solve. Just looking. Fully. Quietly. Without armor. "Thank you," he said. She frowned slightly. For what? For that morning. For walking too fast around a corner. For telling me the truth about Chaiwan. For sitting in a car while I talked to my father. For every Thursday evening. For not letting me continue being the way I was. Ada looked at him for a long moment. You changed that yourself, she said quietly. I just showed up. Yes, he said. That was enough. The cherry blossoms moved in the breeze outside the corridor window. Seoul continued below them, loud and bright and entirely unconcerned. He reached out and straightened her name tag. It had been perfectly straight for months now, but he touched it anyway, just briefly, just because he could. She let him. Then they walked on, together, down the long, bright corridor, toward everything. And so that is the story of the coldest heart in Seoul. It is not a story about a powerful man rescuing a struggling woman, because Ada was never struggling in the way that word is often meant. She was building, quietly, deliberately, without complaint, with every resource she had. She did not need saving. She needed to be seen. And Joon-Seo, for all his sharpness, all his walls, all his years of designing a life with no room for softness, had always been capable of seeing. He had just aimed his attention at surgery instead of people. Until one morning, at 5 o'clock, a girl with a mop and a recorded lecture and no time to waste changed the angle. What I want you to take from this story is not the romance, though the romance is real. I want you to take this. The people who do the work in the dark, who start before the sun rises and study after it sets, and carry their dignity into every room regardless of the uniform they are wearing, those people are not waiting for someone to rescue them. They are waiting for someone worthy enough to walk beside them. And sometimes, in the most unexpected corridors of our lives, that person appears. Carrying coffee. Looking impossible. And everything changes. If this story moved you, drop a comment and tell me which scene hit you the hardest. Share it with someone who needs to hear that the work they are doing in the dark is not invisible. And if you are new here, welcome.
Subscribe.
Because there are many more stories where this one came from. I will see you in the next one.